All right, so now that we know how to take a measurement, when I give you numbers, how do you identify significant figures in that measurement? So let's say that we're not taking measurements in class, but instead I've given you measurements. How do you know which of those digits are significant and which ones are not? Well, there are a set of rules to help you determine that. The first rule is pretty straightforward. All non-zero digits are significant. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All those digits are always significant. The assumption is that if you're given those numbers, the tool allowed you to record that number with some level of certainty, or it was your guess digit. So if I told you something was 1,492 grams, those are all non-zero digits. They are all therefore significant. And your assumption, if I give you that number, should be that the 1, 4, and 9, those were all certain digits, and my last digit was the guess digit. So in this case, I have 4 significant figures. All 4 numbers in my value are significant. My next one is 1.49 grams. So if I were to say that something were 1.49 grams, they're all non-zero digits, so you would assume that they're all significant, so 3 significant figures. You would also assume that my certain digits were 1 and the 4, and that my guess digit was the 9, because you always have all of your certain digits plus 1 guess digit. Now, what you should realize is that these were not massed on the same scale. The scale does not sometimes stop at the ones place or sometimes go to the hundredths place. So these are 2 different tools. This tool is more precise because it goes all the way to the hundredths place, whereas this tool to the left is less precise because it only went to the ones place. My next digit is written in something that's called scientific notation, and we're going to talk more about that later. But in this case, you can see my value here is 1.4927 times 10 to the 3. This part we're going to talk about later, but here are all my non-zero digits that are part of my value. These are all going to be significant, so I have 5 sig figs. And again, my assumption is that only the last digit is a guess digit because a measurement is only allowed 1 guess digit, and all of these were our certain digits. And then remember that our unit is always written at the end of our number. Our next rule is where it gets complicated, zeros. Now here's the thing, zeros are not always significant. That's why this rule gets more complicated. So I like to break up my zeros into zeros that are called captive zeros, trailing zeros, and leading zeros. Captive zeros are always significant, just to make it really easy. So captive zeros are zeros that exist between non-zero digits. So this 0 here is between the 4 and the 9, therefore it is captive, therefore it is significant. So I have 3 significant figures here. In my next number, I've got a 4 and a 9. That decimal does not matter. So because the 0 exists between that 4 and the 9, it's significant. And then here I got another captive 0. It's between the 9 and the 1. It is also significant. Therefore, every single digit in this number is significant. And also, what an amazing tool this is, because look, it is precise to the thousandths place, 10,000ths place. So this is a really precise tool. My last number here is just to show you that all of these zeros here are considered captive. So because the zeros exist between the 9 and the 4, it doesn't matter how many zeros there are in a row. As long as the zeros occur between non-zero digits, so between the 9 and the 4, then all of them are considered captive. Therefore, they're all significant. So that means that all of these digits are significant. The next one are trailing zeros. Trailing zeros are only significant if a decimal is present. So it doesn't have to be near the zeros. All it has to do is be present. As long as a decimal is present in the number, the trailing zeros are significant. So what makes a 0 trailing? Zeros that are trailing are zeros that come after a non-zero digit. Again, it doesn't matter where the decimal is, As long as the 0 is after a non-zero digit, it's considered trailing. And those are always significant if a decimal is present. If there is no decimal, then the zeros are only considered placeholders. They are not significant. All they're doing is telling you that the 9 is supposed to be in the hundreds place or the 9 is supposed to be in the thousands place. It's not actually part of the measurement. So we're saying that we're working with maybe a not very precise tool here, but we need a placeholder to tell us where that value goes. So let's look at some examples. In this number, I have a decimal, and my last non-zero digit was this 9, and I've got a 0 trailing it. So this 0 is significant because there is a decimal present. So that means that all the digits are significant. That means I've got 4 sig figs here. All right, so let's do another one. In this case, I've got my last non-zero digit is 9 again, but in this case it goes 0, 0 decimal. Well, it doesn't matter where the decimal is, just that the decimal is present. And because there is a decimal present, all trailing zeros are considered significant. So because these zeros trail the 9 and a decimal is present, all of those are significant. So I've got 5 sig figs in that number. My next example, we've got the 9, so here is my last non-zero digit, but I've got 3 zeros trailing it and no decimal. That means that those zeros are not significant. They are just placeholders telling me that my number is 409,000. Without those zeros, you would write the number 409, and 409 and 409,000 are not the same number. So you need those zeros to tell you that the 9 is in the thousands place, but the zeros are not part of your measurement. So whatever tool you used here was not very precise, because whatever your tool you used here only had these certain digits and you made this guess digit. So in this case, I only have 3 sig figs. All right, so here is my last one. I have something that measured, 40,090 grams. So again, I have a 0 that's trailing the 9, but there's no decimal. So because there's no decimal, that 0 is considered not significant, and it is only a placeholder, and this number only has 4 sig figs. Last rule about zeros. Leading zeros are never significant. They are always a placeholder. So zeros that occur before a non-zero digit are considered leading zeros, and they are always considered a placeholder. So they are not part of the measurement. They just tell you what place the measurement numbers start in. So here is my first one. And I'll show you how to write all of these numbers so that you don't even need to write the zeros, because again, the zeros are just placeholders. So if I'm looking at this first number value here, my first non-zero digit is this 4. So any 0 that comes before the 4 is considered a leading 0. Leading zeros are never significant, so I only have 3 sig figs here, the 4, 1, and 1. So there's no rule about the decimal here, so it doesn't matter if there's a decimal or not. Here is my first my non-zero digit, it's a 1. Any 0 that comes before that 1 is not part of the measurement. They are just placeholders and telling you that that 1 starts in the tenths place. So the 1 is significant, the captive 0 is significant, and the 9 is significant. There's 3 significant figures. The leading zeros are not significant. All right, so let's do it again. 4 is my first non-zero digit. Any 0 that comes before that 4 is considered a leading 0. Again, it doesn't matter where the decimal is. Leading zeros are zeros that happen in front of the number. So all of these zeros are considered leading zeros. None of them are significant. They are all placeholders, and so there's only 5 sig figs in this number. I've got the 4, I've got my 2 captive zeros, I've got my 9, and then this trailing zero is significant because there is a decimal present. So a decimal is present, so the trailing zero is significant. My last one is this guy right here, so this value with lots of zeros in it. So in this value, I've got 7 sig figs. So here's my first non-zero digit, that's the 1. Any zero coming before it is just a placeholder, so these are not significant. I've got 3 captive zeros, those are all significant. And then I've got a 1, and that's a non-zero digit, so it's significant. And then I've got these 2 trailing zeros. And because a decimal is present somewhere in the number, those trailing zeros at the end of my number are considered significant. So in this case, my number has 7 sig figs. We'll do practice in class.